Well, welcome to North Point. I'll wait. Good to see you. Good to have you with us. I want to welcome each of our campuses. I want to welcome our Republic campus. I'm going to welcome you first today. Welcome, Republic, to today. Welcome to our Dream Center campus. And welcome to our Nixa campus. Thank you for joining us. And Springfield, your patience, welcome to you as well. We want to thank those who are joining us online. I learned this week through an email, because we have a lot of people who their interaction with us is primarily online. And sometimes I'm insensitive to those who are joining us online. For example, we've had a growing population of Belgium watchers, okay, about 4. And I said that they speak Belgish. I want you to know I know you speak Flemish. We looked it up. We hear you. You are seen, you are known. Unless I heard wrong, and then I'm really losing our population in Belgium. But glad to have you here today. We are going to talk about trauma today. And we're going to talk about how does God enter the very most intimate pains we've ever experienced. We're going to talk about communion today. We're going to celebrate communion today. Matter of fact, if you're joining us online, we'd love for you to celebrate communion with us as well. We're going to do that at the end of our time, and so you have time to get any type of elements that would represent the blood and the body, juice, the wine, or you got bread or something along those lines, anything that would help you to be able to remember that time and make that special for you in your setting. I would love for you to prepare as well. And then today, as our time together, I'm hopeful that the resource page we have on North Point Mo is our app, and I know that it sounds like white noise if we talk about the app all the time, and so I know that that's the risk. But we have added new resources, even this week, to that app that I really feel would be helpful. Specifically when it comes to trauma, we've got some great recommended resources. We have a couple of counselors who are actually North Pointers, who are professional counselors who focus in the area that we'll be talking about today. We know that is not an exhaustive list of resources, but we think it would be helpful. So I want to make you familiar with that. If you go to any of our message series and you look at the tile, whether on our website that's going to be coming, or we're having a new website coming up here real soon, or the app, you'll be able to see series resources as well. So I want to make that available. Okay, Leanne and I have been in Missouri almost 10 years now, and we come from the Northwest. So there are a few things that we had been to Springfield probably a grand total of maybe 3 or 4 days in our lifetimes before we moved. And we didn't come out here to interview or anything like that. This is when Skype was edgy. And so we moved out here for the very first time with a U-Haul, but we had some friends, and they were kind of normal. Right? I know that some of them are here. And so we're like, okay, Springfield's got to be great. We come out here, and we didn't know how unique Springfield was. I mean, all the touristy things, like we saw, chariots or buggies and horses, and that was new to us. We didn't have those in the Pacific Northwest. Not even in the suburbs of Seattle. There were no, horse-drawn buggies there. They didn't have restaurants that chucked rolls at you there. We didn't freeze our custard. We didn't have Bass Pro. I don't even know if that was legal in Seattle at the time. So a lot of new things, but probably the newest thing for us, the most unique, was the Missouri weather. Now, we had weather in Seattle. You had, warmer rain, cooler rain. You had different, variances of weather, but you didn't have what we experience here. Now, when I first moved here, people would say to me, here's the thing about our weather. If you don't like the weather, the good thing about Missouri weather, it'll change in 5 minutes. You heard that? I say that now to everybody because now I'm a Missourian. But that was so unique to us. The weather would change like crazy. I remember the first time I ever experienced this, it was supposed to snow. It was in May, and I was in a golf tournament. Not like it was anybody could be in the golf tournament. It was sponsored, not because I'm good. So I'm golfing, but I get up and it was like 65 degrees in the morning, and I had never lived in a place where it gets colder during the day, and so I wore shorts, and it did start snowing, and it got into the 20s by about hole number 4. I was the only one in Pokemon jammies before Pokemon was a thing again on Mill Creek. But anyway, or Millwood. But bottom line is the weather would change all the time. My first weekend here, it was a Saturday night after a service, and we had a storm come through, and it was a tornado warning, tornado watch. Well, I didn't know what those were. I'd seen a couple of movies, cows flying, that kind of stuff. And I was still at the office, and I was the only one here. It was later at night. And the sirens were going off, but I couldn't remember. Is this the 10 o'clock on Wednesday and we ignore it siren? I don't know like what that means, and I didn't even know who Brandon Beck was at the time. I mean, so I'm new here. And so people were saying, okay, there's a tornado coming through northwest Springfield, and so I'm like, okay, no big deal. So people were getting out of there. Well, someone called me because they say, hey, you were the last one there. Are you still at the office? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, well, you got to leave. There's a tornado coming through northwest Springfield. And I'm like, we got a big tin building. What can go wrong, right? Like, I don't know this thing. And they say, okay, no, you got to get out. So I'm like, okay, I'll finish. And they're like, no, you got to like leave. That's what we do. We got to leave and find shelter. So I get in my car, head towards 44, but the weather changed so quick, it started pouring. Like, you know how it is. You live here or you've been around here. It's like a movie theater rain coming down. I can't even drive anymore, so I pull into the McDonald's on North Kansas Expressway, which is not rare for me to do. I did have my shirt on this time, don't judge. So I get into the McDonald's, and the manager comes out and says, hey, we all have to go into the storm shelter now. And I look around at everyone who had found shelter in the McDonald's that night, and I thought, I don't know that I'm going to be safer in here or driving home. So I got and drove home. Well, Leanne is fascinated by this weather. So she started buying weather radios, plural, because, in case we didn't hear the loud, obnoxious sound upstairs or in a different room. So we have these weather radios that are awesome because if there's any type of disturbance in the force anywhere within 1,000 miles, it'll wake you up in the middle of the night. So because she didn't want to be surprised at this weather that comes in because this is brand new to us. And we haven't turned on our weather radio in a long time, right? We got the app. But what I want to talk about today, I want to talk about this idea of storms coming in. We will all have storms coming in. I don't have to spend any time convincing you that a storm will come because you've had storms. You've had things you didn't expect. The challenge is this: we don't have those kind of warnings. We don't have the weather radio for life storms. I don't know if I'd even want it. If I had the opportunity to find out what bad things would happen in my life. But we have things that are unexpected, things that turn on a dime, things that we could not prepare for, that now we find ourselves in the middle of. We have these storms. I want to talk about how we handle these storms. I'm going to look at a story in Scripture, famous guy when it comes to trouble. His name is Job, and there's 40 chapters of description of this dude who sat in life's worst storm. But before we do that, as we talk about trauma, I want us to define it for today's purpose. I'm not a psychologist, so I understand there's different ways to define it. But for today's purpose, I want us to define trauma as it's not about the bad things that happened in my past, because we have those. That's not what I'm talking about today. I don't want you to think about trauma being, oh yeah, that's the bad thing that happened in my past. I'm talking about the bad things that are happening in your present because of your past. The things that are happening right now because of what happened back then. There's different, because I'm not triggered by swing sets. But when I was 7 years old, I can tell you about a bad thing that happened to me on a swing set. I was climbing a swing set at a birthday party, and a bunch of people were doing underdoggies, and this was an old rusty swing set, and I was on the top, and they were swinging it with a lot of force, and the top went up and came down and pinched my arm, and that was traumatic. It was very traumatic. But I'm not afraid of swing sets now. Like if I drive by one, I'm not like freaking out, nothing like that. Because that was something bad that happened in my past, but it's a scar, it's cool. I'm talking about the things, trauma being the bad things that happened in your past that keep showing up right now. That trigger. And they're real things, right? And we all have them. And I don't know what it is for you. It could be a relationship thing. It could be an illness thing. It could be a spiritual thing. So we're going to talk about that today. So we're going to dive into the story of Job. And I think the first 5 verses of Job's life are very interesting. It says this in Job chapter 1. You would think his first 5 verses, you would think that this book is going to go different. You would think that this is a book that would be at an airport on one of the top 10 books to read on your flight type of books. It's going to be a how to succeed in life type of book. Here's his bio. It says this: once there was a man from Uz by the name of Job. He was a very good man, his character spotless, his integrity unquestioned. In fact, he so believed in God that he sought to honor God in all things. He deliberately avoided evil in all of his affairs. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 team of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a large number of servants. That's not like a farmer's only ad right there, right? Like it's just the fact that some of you know what that means. Among Easterners, he was the most powerful and influential man. His sons were also wealthy landowners too. All used to gather together on each other's birthdays and special occasions. The brothers would take turns hosting the others in their homes, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When these days of feasting were through, Job would call all of his family to his own house and purify them, rising up early in the morning to offer burnt sacrifices for each one. Job's the man. He's got it all. He's got a wife and 10 kids. He's got a whole lot of livestock. He's got a whole lot of land. He's the man. He's spotless. He's the dad everybody wants. He's a husband everybody wants. He's the house that all the friends want to hang out at their house because they got the awesome basketball hoop. This is Job. Everybody loves Job. And why I want to take some time before we talk about the bad things that happened to Job, I want to remind us that Job had some good things that happened to him. Matter of fact, why that's helpful, I wrote it down in my notes. Experiencing a wrong is rarely correlated with whether or not I'm living right. Experiencing a wrong doesn't mean you're living wrong. Now, it might, you're not off the hook, okay? It's always good to at least ask the question, is this a natural consequence of my choice, okay? So don't just skip to the, well, it happened to Job, it happened to me too. Wow, there's 2 of us. So don't just skip there. It's always good to milk the failures of life, to lean into the learnings. You don't have losses, you just have learnings. I understand that, right? But it's good to see, is there anything I did that made this attracted to my life? Ask the question, do not stick there. Don't stick there, because then that will, we'll talk about that. What's important is you say, okay, just because I'm experiencing wrong doesn't mean I'm not right. I'm experiencing wrong because I'm not in heaven yet. You're not, in case you need a reminder. You're going to experience storms because we live in a pathway where storms travel through. It's called life. You've all experienced some. So, as a matter of fact, Job wasn't experiencing wrong because he was living wrong. Job was experiencing wrong, actually, in his case, because he was living right. I don't know how this all works, but it says that Satan was walking to and fro and just kind of evaluating God's creation. And he says to God, he gets in this little, chest puffing match, right? And he says, God, your creation, they're not really, you protect them. They wouldn't really follow you. They're not good. And God's like, oh yeah, have you considered my servant Job? He's faultless. And he starts giving all the accolades of Job, which if I'm Job, I would blush. Like, I hope that God would be like, Well, Satan, have you considered Jeremy in Springfield, Missouri? You ought to check him out, right? You heard of that guy? Oh, he's trending, right? I would love to be the type of person that God's like, well, a lot of them are schmucks, I'll give you that, Satan, but not Jeremy. Until I see what happened to Job. Because Satan's like, oh, Job only serves you because he's got a silver spoon. You shield him. You protect him. Look how many donkeys he's got. That's just the female ones. And he says, if you allowed me to bring some storms in his life, he'll curse you. And at that point, I wish God would say, shut your mouth. Get Job's name out of your mouth, right? And whatever, okay? You do something. But instead, he says, no, he wouldn't. Not Job. Go ahead. Have at him. Yeah. Now, I'm not jealous of Job anymore, okay? First 5 verses, I'm wondering what's going on, how I can be like that. And then when God says, go ahead and allow him to experience storms if that's what you think is his motive, test him because I know that's not true. Would you be comfortable with God saying that about you? Now, I do not believe the story of Job is to say that every tragedy comes because God's trying to test us. I do believe that every tragedy will test us and God will utilize and leverage it. And so we'll walk through that together today. But I also understand that tragedy comes to all of us. And so Job is sitting in a storm. Matter of fact, what happens is God says, okay, Satan, go ahead and throw storms his way. Tragedy after tragedy. There's an earthquake, there's a fire, there's crazy storms, there's just natural disasters, there's sickness, there's plague. Job loses all 10 of his kids, all of his land, all of his livestock, all of his wealth, all of his reputation. Job loses all of it. And his wife is fed up. And it makes a lot of sense. A lot of us would be like, man, I can't believe his wife is mad. Hello, I can't believe Job wasn't. His wife is mad, saying, curse God and die. Why would you worship a God that allows this? Job has 3 friends who show up and start speaking life to him. Because as our tendency is, we're uncomfortable when someone else is uncomfortable, so we try and make them comfortable so we're no longer uncomfortable. Does that make sense? If you're dealing with something and I can't fix you really quick, it makes me nervous. So I'd rather just fix you quick and we don't have to worry about it. Because if you have to keep worrying about it, now I have to develop something called empathy, and I don't know that I got that. And so it's easy for me to throw a pithy saying and say, hurry up and get better. And then we're all happy, right? Because if you're hurting, then maybe I need to hurt too. So Job's friends try and cheer him up. It doesn't work. And so then they start scolding him, rebuking him. Again, it makes sense. It's natural because if Job can't cheer up, then maybe he's wrong. Because if he's right, then maybe they have to change their theology about pain. And they didn't want to do that. So finally, they're just giving up on Job and they're just sitting down and shutting up, which is how they should have started. That's what a good friend would have done. And Job's sitting there covered with sores, trying to scratch off the boils with a broken pottery pieces. He's miserable. And then it starts raining on him. He's sitting in an ash heap of what used to be his property, and now it's raining in the storm. And here's what he says in Job chapter 30, verse 22. He says to God, God, you toss me about in this storm. You are the one that has me on spin cycle in this storm. And we've all experienced that storm. Some of us have had that physical storm, that financial storm, that storm of betrayal, that storm of tragedy. And when we get stuck in this spin cycle, we're like, why are you doing this to me, God? You did this to me, and I don't understand it. So what I want to do is I want to talk to us about how we walk through these moments. There's a book I want to recommend. It's called The Dark Night of the Soul. It's not a bestseller, probably. It's old. It was written by a 16th century spiritual leader, St. John of the Cross. I don't even know his last name. I don't think it was Cross, and his middle name was of the. Okay, but that's just what they called him, St. John of the Cross, dark night of the soul, who writes about what happens when you have a long period of God seeming distant. And what happens when you can't feel his presence anywhere? How do you go forward with that? And some of you, that might be, and it's not going to be an easy book to get through, and they don't have a cartoon movie of it made yet, okay? But some of you, I'll tell you the type of person that might be for. The person who's dealing with trauma as defined by what happened to me in my past is all I can think about right now. Like when I drive by this, trigger, stuck. Or maybe for you, it's spiritually. The things that happen in your past, you're kind of like Job. Not in the first 5 verses like, the rest of the 40 chapters like. Like, God, why am I in this storm? You know you're like that when you can come to a gathering like this, and we're like, aren't you glad you're in church? And you're like, nope. I didn't do it. But you saw it. That's on you, okay? Like you're like, I'm singing songs? Like, no, I'm not singing these songs. I don't even believe the words on that screen right now. I'm just gonna sip my coffee. I want them to be true, but if I really want them to be true, it's really painful that it doesn't feel like it's true for me right now. Yep. That's your sign that the dark night of the soul might be a helpful resource for you. And it's all right, you're seen. Because if you follow Jesus through enough storms, one of the things you're not always going to have is clarity. Right. And there will be times you're going to be like, why is this happening? I don't understand. And if you fake your way and be like, that's all right, the joy of the Lord is my strength, right? And you just go through it. And what happens, we talked about this last week, is if you stuff it in the trunk, that's a bad place for that emotion to live. You can't let it steer and you can't be stuffing it. You got to figure out how to let this passenger be with you on the journey. Right. So here's what I wrote about the first lesson. There's a lot of lessons for Job's life. First is this: addressing my pain is more helpful than suppressing my pain. Addressing my pain is a lot more helpful than suppressing it. Why? If you ignore the trauma that is going on in your life, then you will just distance yourself. You will medicate yourself so you don't have to deal with it, but you won't have healing. You'll just have avoidance. And it doesn't bring health. You will have to deal with whatever you dismiss one day, and it's going to come back even more deformed. And so that's why even with church, it's all right for you to say, God, I don't even feel like worshiping you right now. I hope there's some truth to that. And you know what that is? That's called contending for your faith. You don't need to feel it to fight. And God can handle it. Job puts on some boxing gloves and just throws some haymakers. And God's big enough to handle it. He's not mad at Job. As a matter of fact, Job learns a great deal about God and God's care in the midst of this. And if that's you, wrestle. When Leanne and I, we had been married, I don't know, probably 7-8 years before we ever went to marriage counseling. And so we've been doing marriage counseling for years now. And not when I say do it, like paying for it, going to it, right? And I remember when we first would go to marriage counseling, I'm like I thought it was how to convince a paid professional that I'm doing well, right? And so I would go there, and I'll never forget, first time we ever did counseling, he said, hey, why don't we start with you just talk about your marriage? And he said, start with you, Jeremy. I'm like, it's great. It's awesome. He says, okay. What would you change about Leanne? I'm like, I wouldn't change anything about Leanne. Like, why would you? Right, sweetie? Right? And he just looks at me. He looked way less impressed than I thought he would be. And then he looks at Leanne and says, how's your marriage? Totally different answer. I'm like, honey, this is not how we practiced, okay? What? Like, this guy's gonna think I'm not great, right? Like, and like, honestly, and that was not even an exaggeration. Like, because I thought, what I have to do is, I need an affirmation, I need a professional reference that I'm healthy, that I don't have issues, right? And I was missing, I had to learn that what I need someone who can look at this and say, what are the issues I'm ignoring that I need to be talking about? What are the things that I'm suppressing I should be addressing? Yes, that's true for marriage. This ain't a marriage conference. It's true for parenting. That's not what this is. It's true for any trauma in our life. Anything that we're like, man, that hurt a lot. The answer of health is not through ignoring it. Listen, you can't drink enough to get rid of that. You can't sleep with enough people to get rid of that. You can't purchase a new anything to get rid of that. What you have to do is you have to address the very thing you're tempted to suppress. And Job, the miracle of Job is not like, well, Job just got up and he pulled up his britches and he started building him a house. No, he sat in the stinking ashes during the rain. He said, God, why? I don't know why. Addressing the pain. Here's another thing on this. The location of my healing, unfortunately, is often the same location as my pain. Sometimes I wish it were different, but I wish I was hurt here, so I'm healed here. But often it's the location of my healing is going to be found when I have the guts and the vulnerability to go back to the location of my pain. Now, I know that there are some people who have hurt you that they're not even around to make it right. I understand that. But that doesn't mean you suppress it. You still have to address it, think about it, deal with it, get some help. We've got some great resources. We got some videos, we've got some books, we've got some counselors who deal with trauma specifically we're recommending here. I mean, if you're stuck, go to that place and say, how do I, by talking about this in a healthy way, dealing with this in a healthy way, all of a sudden get unstuck from this? There's a story real quick about a little boy, 5-year-old boy who made a ceramic project for his dad, and they're spending lots of time in art class over the period of weeks and weeks, forming this little piece of pottery and painting it, and he's so excited, but it's a surprise. He's not going to tell his dad, and so now it's parent-teacher conference, and this little 5-year-old boy, and the whole class really is excited to give their prized creation to their parent, and the dad knew something was up, and the kids are up there, and the kindergarten teacher says, okay, class, you can now give your special project to your parent. And this 5-year-old boy, so excited to bring his creation to his dad, runs to his dad, trips, and his ceramic project goes up in the air and lands on the floor and shatters. Well, the kids start sobbing, and everyone starts looking, and there's other dads there, and the dad gets a little embarrassed, right? Like, this is awkward, and kids crying, and he just says, it's okay, it's no big deal, it's no big deal. And the mom looks at him and says, it is too a big deal. And she starts sobbing and grabs the boy, and they sob together, and the dad's like, yeah, no, totally a big deal. She says, let's take these pieces, let's bring it home, let's see if we can make something out of this at home. So they go home, and mom and son have a little project and glue, and well, for the next birthday present, they present the dad. They've made a butterfly out of these broken pieces. The dad always hung on to this gift as a reminder. It's a big deal. Pain is a big deal. Loss is a big deal. Brokenness is a big deal. But it doesn't mean God can't make something beautiful out of it. But you don't start with, but it'll be all right. You start with, this sucks. This hurts. This is heavy. So the location of my healing has to occur when I'm willing to deal with this. Okay, a couple questions now. I want to show a story. A couple questions that we're tempted to ask. Ask this question, what next, not why this? When you're going through it or you can't get through it, ask yourself this question, what next? That's a helpful question. The question, why did this happen? There's a short shelf life to that being helpful, right? Like I need to think about what did I do to kind of make this more probable, if anything. Okay, think about it, deal with it, and milk those learnings. But you can't get stuck in the why this, because asking why this will paralyze you. Asking what next will propel you. Pain happens. And I don't want you to feel diminished in your pain by acknowledging that all of us have it, because it's very real and it's very personal. But when you go through it, your natural tendency, like Job, is to just figure out why, and that's going to leave you stuck. What's way more helpful is to figure out what next. And part of it is you're going to have to do stuff you don't feel like doing, which is, I think, the definition of adulting, okay? Doing stuff you don't feel like doing. And I wrote down this way, do the right thing even when you feel the wrong way. Yes. Do the right thing in painful moments even when you feel the wrong way. When you are hurt by that person, there's a way to have healthy boundaries and do the right thing even though you have the wrong feelings. Because the wrong way is going to make you drown it, distract it, whatever. It's going to compound it. So do the right thing. That's the definition of spiritual maturity. So what do we do? Here's the recipe. Is we ask the Spirit of God to help us endure the kind of pain we can't fix. Some of you have experienced a kind of loss where it's not going to be all right. Some of you are not going to be able to let this be a Hallmark movie, no matter how hard you try. That's heavy. God can't fix everything. No matter what you sing, you can't. Because some things have happened. So what do then? Ask the Spirit of God to help you endure the thing you can't fix. God, I don't think I'll ever get over this. And I need you to help me get through this. There's a very rich verse in Romans chapter 8. I think it's underrated. It says this about the Spirit of God. It says, in the same way the Spirit of God helps us in our weaknesses. We don't know what we ought to pray for. Have you ever been in a spot where you don't even know what you should pray for? But the Spirit himself intercedes for us. I love this part. With groans that words can't express. I need God to just groan for me. Have you ever been in a spot where you're like, Job on an ash hill. The loss, the pain, I don't even know what to do. And God's like, can I help? I will put my Spirit in you to just groan on your behalf. Give you the power to endure the thing you can't fix. It's a great verse to memorize. The second part is this. Then ask the power of God's Spirit to give you the strength to leverage the pain you can fix. Some pain I can fix. God, give me your Spirit to help me do that, because I'm weak. Some pain I can't fix. God, give me the Spirit to get through it. So if we wanted to do Traumaholics Anonymous, we would say it this way. God, grant me the Spirit to endure the things I cannot fix. Grant me the power to leverage the things I can, and grant me the wisdom to know the difference. Yes. Because some of us are sitting on an ash. Some of us are, I can't fix that. Okay, some of us are sitting on an ash heap, and what we do need to do is get up. Some of us have been getting up, and what you need to do is sit down on an ash heap for a while. And the Spirit of God is your gift, your comforter in both situations. I want you to see a story from a North Pointer, from our Republic campus. So thankful they were brave enough to share this vulnerable story about their moment of unimaginable loss a year ago, their son to suicide. and how they've processed this and how they're asking God's Spirit to help them to move. And as you see their story, I hope it encourages your story.
You know, it's just kind of, as kids get older, they kind of seem to try to spend more time away from the parents, you know. And I think a lot of that sometimes can be the parents' fault, you know what I mean? Because, you know, we get involved with our little phones and stuff too. You know, he was starting to not want to go to school and stuff. That was hard to understand. That was hard to put my head around. And he would go and hide in the bathroom all day at school. And man, you get to wondering, like, okay, is he being bullied, you know? And I know now, you know a lot of things now that you didn't before, but I understand now that he was struggling, you know, mentally. With what, I don't know. You know, I've heard from several people that gets really dark, you know. Going through the counseling and then him stopping the counseling because we thought he was doing better, and he said he was doing better, didn't want to go to counseling anymore. And okay, cool, you know, we're on the right track. Monday on May 10th, I got up at 4 o'clock and noticed his window was open in his room and he was gone. You know, as a parent, you're thinking all kinds of things. I knew he was on his bike, so I thought, well, maybe the chain came off or he fell somewhere. So I spent about an hour in our neighborhoods, all the neighborhoods, just driving around and nothing. And so I went back home, and at that time, my wife had called the Republic Police, and so I finally got a call from them, hey, meet us here, we want to talk to you. And you just kind of know at that point, your heart kind of sinks a little bit, and you're like, oh gosh, you know, like, yeah, he took his life. There's times where I want to dwell on what I could have done, or I think about, you know, what he was thinking about right before, you know what I mean? Because I know I had texted him, so, and I had to ask my friend that's the sheriff, but, you know, he said his phone was laying on his chest. He had laid down to do it, and it's just like, wow, you know? So I'm just hoping that he read that, you know, just so it was my last I love you. The entire community of Republic was reaching out, and it was so much, you know. And that first week was hard because you're reliving everything over and over. And I didn't get much sleep, and I still do it, but you just felt like you were gonna walk into his room and he'd be there, you know what I mean? Like, just waiting for him to come home. Prayer is so important. Finding your little quiet place by yourself and saying a prayer and believing, I think, you know. I have a lot of faith. Jesus is leading the way. You know, he's always there for the ones that are really hurting, brokenhearted. Man, I feel it. You know what I mean? Like, I know, like, if I start crying and thinking about Tristan or whatever, it's like, boom, hey, I've got you. You know what I mean? I feel that, man. You know what I mean? As a human being, as we are in this earthly world, you have the thoughts all the time, like, okay, well, what if? You know, what if I would have done this, or what if I would have done that? And, you know, I've learned over time, it's like, no, I can't do that, because that in itself takes you to a really, really dark place. Because the parent doesn't want to feel like they've been a failure. And it's like, you haven't been. You know, people need to stop thinking that. I just think it's really important that people understand how worthy they really are. They just don't understand it for what reason. You know, the weight of the world's on them. They want to fit in, you know, they want to look a certain way, and it's like, why? You know, like, God made you different than anybody else. Why do you want to look like somebody else? Why do you know, it's like, you are special. You're one of a kind. I don't know, man. It's such a hard thing to deal with, a hard issue to deal with, suicide and mental health, and because nobody wants to talk about it, but we have to talk about it. We have to. Statistics are all over the place that show that, the percentage of death rates go down big time the more we talk about it. Because it's like, don't be afraid to reach out, you know what I mean? I'm sitting here thinking about it. It's like it's everything Jesus would do for these people, lifting them up, loving on them, not pushing them to the side because they're different or they act different or they look different, or, you know what I mean? It's like he loved everybody. I keep going back to that song, and it's like, show me a mountain he can't move, seriously. So I'm going for it, you know what I mean? I know we can make a difference, and I think that just fuels me. Whenever I hear a student say, man, you guys are starting to make a difference, that just fuels me, you know what I mean? When a student talks about Tristan, it fuels me. When a student comes to our little support group that we started on Sunday and they're feeling down, and you see other students that have gone through similar things and they're talking to them and lifting them up, and it's like, wow, I mean, that fuels me, you know what I mean? And it's like, that's what we're supposed to do, and not shove it under a rug and hide it, and because that's not gonna help anything. I think we can stop suicide 100%, I really do. That's probably really bold, but I think we're supposed to be that way.
Let's thank the Shaws for sharing their story. What do you do when you face the storm you never saw coming, you would never want to be in? You ask the Spirit of God to give you the power to endure the thing you can't fix. And then you ask the Spirit of God to give you the power to leverage the things you can. That's what you do. It's raw, it's messy, it's unique to every person, but it's how the Spirit of God shows up in our lives. And I'm going to invite the worship team to come forward to each of our locations, and as they do that, let me bring it back to Job's story. As he's paralyzed by theology, paralyzed by why, he's sitting there, and then God starts just talking to him. He doesn't get all of his answers, but he realizes this idea that God may not have caused his pain, but God can use it. And I'm hoping that's the biggest lesson we can learn from Job. I don't think God's the author of our pain. I think there's times, just naturally is God will force us to grow, but I believe there's a lot of things that are growth opportunities that were not caused by God. They're caused by being human, and they're caused by being exposed to darkness and people around us. So I don't believe God causes all that pain. Why do bad things happen? Because we're not in heaven. Why is death rate so high? Teeters around 100%? Because we're not in heaven. One day, there'll be no more pain, no more sickness, no more sorrow, no more death. Until that day, you have the Comforter to endure the things you can't fix and to leverage the things you can. So we share our story. Job says it this way, verse 5 of chapter 42. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes see you. I'd heard about you. I learned about you. But in this storm, I feel like I know you. And I didn't get over it, but I got through it. And I pictured Job going to a flower garden. It says that he was restored twofold from all the stats that he had had. But I bet he still had a flower garden of the things that weren't able to be restored, but that could be remembered. It was God's Spirit. I want to invite those who are going to help make sure everyone has elements, maybe an usher at each campus. But I know that you probably were offered communion elements when you came in today. And so if you're able to help us, I'm going to encourage a couple of ushers, maybe at every site, to come all the way to the front. They'll have elements in their bucket. As they make their way back up the aisle, just simply raise your hand if you would like some elements. No pressure, but if you'd like to, just raise your hand. They'll make sure you have some elements. We're going to share in communion and a song today. Why communion? It's not because the flavor. It's not even because of the formality. It's to remember that God is the God who suffered. God is the God who experienced pain, loss, brokenness. When we take this bread in a second, when we take this bread and we can break it, and then we'll take it during the song and whenever you're ready to do so. But as I explain it, when this bread is broken, that reminds us that it's a God who understands loss, a God who hung on a cross for us, his body broken for us, his blood spilled for us, for the forgiveness, a God who understands, a God who meets us in our brokenness. The place of our hurt is the place of our healing, and a God who makes all things right in the end. Not necessarily right now, but in the end. And as we take this together, some of us thankful because he's got us through a storm, some of us groaning because we're in one, let the Spirit of God just groan alongside with you. It's all right. It's all right. Let's be people that don't have to be so polished we ignore the pain. And let's not be people who are paralyzed by pain. Let's be people who take the broken pieces and we see something beautiful that comes out of it. So would you stand with me? Each of our campuses, they're going to lead us in a song about a living hope, about a God who understands our pain and joins us. It's called the fellowship of his suffering, and allow his Spirit to speak to us. So Father, today we remember you, your body, your blood. I pray today in our brokenness, you will make us whole. God, I pray your Spirit would just groan alongside of us today. And God, that your Spirit would propel us to point people towards hope, even when we've experienced pain. In Jesus' name, amen.